She called the cops on her new neighbor, but had no idea she just reported the deputy director of the FBI. You ever notice how some people think they own the sidewalk? Not literally, but in their mind. They're the gatekeepers. They see everything, remember everyone, and if you're not part of their mental registry, suddenly you're suspicious. That's Clarice Whitman. She's 52, lives on Poplar Drive in Plano, Texas. And if you ask her, she'll tell you she's the unofficial mayor of the neighborhood. That Saturday afternoon, the sun was heavy, the air thick, and her front porch was her throne. With a pair of binoculars on the little wicker table beside her iced lemonade, yes, binoculars, and a floral sun hat shading her pale forehead, she had nothing better to do but watch. She always watched. That's when she saw her. A black woman, mid-40s, lean build, dark green swimsuit, sunglasses on, lying by the pool at the corner house that had just sold 3 weeks ago. A paperback book rested on her stomach. Her hair was pulled back into a tight puff. She looked comfortable, too comfortable. Clarice sat up in her chair. She hadn't seen a moving truck, no welcome party, no introductions, no attempt to greet the neighbors. And now this woman had the audacity to sunbathe, like she owned the place. Clarice grabbed her phone and squinted at the figure again. Something felt off. She tapped the non-emergency line in her contacts, hesitated for a half second, then shook her head and pressed call. Collin County Police Dispatch, what's your emergency? Clarice's voice turned syrupy, the kind reserved for customer service calls and concerned citizen complaints. Hi, yes, I'm calling from Poplar Drive. I think someone might be trespassing. There's a woman at the old Henderson place, backyard near the pool. I don't think she lives there. Can you describe her? She's black, mid-40s, I guess, wearing a swimsuit, just laying there like it's her house. I don't recognize her at all. The dispatcher was silent for a second. Any signs of forced entry? No, but you never know. She could have jumped the fence, or maybe someone left the back gate unlocked. Clarice lowered her phone and stared again. The woman took a sip of her drink and flipped a page in her book, calm as a breeze. She wasn't hiding, wasn't sneaking around. That made Clarice even more suspicious. She just looks out of place, Clarice added. The dispatcher asked for her name. Clarice gave it without hesitation. 2 officers were dispatched. ETA, 8 minutes. Clarice set her phone down and folded her arms. She stared hard at the woman, waiting for something, anything, to validate the feeling in her gut. But nothing happened. The woman just laid there, enjoying her afternoon like she belonged. But Clarice had already decided she didn't. But Clarice wasn't the only one watching that day, and she was about to find out the hard way that not everyone lets assumptions slide without consequence. Clarice had lived on Poplar Drive for 19 years, long enough to see families come and go, lawns grow patchy and then lush again, kids sprout into teenagers and drive away in dented used cars. In her mind, she was the keeper of standards. If trash bins weren't rolled in by dusk, if grass reached over 2 inches, if Halloween decorations stayed up past November 5th, Clarice noticed, and she remembered. The corner house used to belong to the Hendersons. Sweet couple, retired, traded Texas for Arizona when arthritis made winters here feel like punishment. Clarice had baked them a bundt cake when they moved in. She never got the pan back, but she remembered the for sale sign coming down. The blind stayed shut for a week or 2, then slowly, signs of life. A car in the driveway. Porch light left on. Once or twice, Clarice caught sight of a woman, maybe that same woman, walking in or out, always alone, always quickly. No introductions, no block-wide email, just movement in the shadows. That rubbed Clarice the wrong way. Around here, neighbors said hello. You made yourself known. There was a rhythm, a way things were done. Clarice wasn't alone in her feelings either. At least once a week, she spoke to Carol Ferguson down the block. Carol had thoughts too. She keeps to herself, Carol whispered one afternoon on the phone, and you know what that usually means. Clarice did know, or at least she thought she did. So when she made that call, it wasn't just about the woman at the pool. It was about what that woman represented, a change in tempo, a disruption to the unspoken rules. Still, something buzzed in the back of her mind. What if she was wrong? She brushed it off and stood from her porch chair, stepping behind the tall hedges at the edge of her yard. From there, she could get a better view of the Hendersons' backyard, now the mystery woman's backyard. The sun reflected off the water, the faint sound of jazz hummed through outdoor speakers, and the woman's head gently nodded to the beat. Clarice squinted. That patio furniture looked expensive. That grill was stainless steel, top of the line, and the landscaping, impeccable. There were no weeds, no overgrown bushes, no sign that the property had been neglected for even a day. She's either a professional cleaner, Clarice muttered under her breath, or... The sentence never finished. 8 minutes after her call, a black and white squad car cruised slowly down Poplar Drive. Another followed. Clarice straightened her blouse and stepped forward like she had just happened to be outside watering her flowers. The first officer, tall, tan-skinned, square jaw, stepped out and looked around. "Are you the caller, ma'am?" Clarice smiled, trying to sound casual. "Yes. That's her, right there, in the backyard." The officer peered through the slats in the wooden fence. His partner moved to the side gate, which was unlocked. They slipped inside, careful but not exactly quiet. Clarice stayed behind, her heart suddenly beating faster. Maybe she'd finally proven her point. But on the other side of that fence, someone was already standing up, and she wasn't the one who was about to be caught off guard. Danielle Monroe heard the gate creak before she saw them. 2 shadows stretched across the concrete beside the pool, growing longer with each step. She lifted her sunglasses slightly, just enough to make eye contact. Her hand rested on the arm of her lounger, fingers curled around the cold glass of iced tea. Calm, steady, she didn't flinch. "Ma'am," one of the officers called out, "we're responding to a report of trespassing. Can we speak with you for a moment?" Danielle slowly sat up. Her book slipped off her lap and onto the chair beside her. She took a breath, placed her drink on the patio table, and stood. Her movements were deliberate, measured, like someone who had rehearsed this exact scene before. "I live here," she said, voice firm but polite. "This is my house." The taller officer, badge reading R. Ortega, shifted his weight. "We got a call from a neighbor who wasn't sure. Do you have ID, ma'am?" Danielle tilted her head just slightly. "Sure, I do." She walked over to the small patio cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a leather tote. No rush, no panic. As she unzipped the inside pocket, she looked directly at Officer Ortega. "Out of curiosity," she asked, "do you usually ask people sunbathing by their pool to show ID, or only when someone looks like me?" The other officer, Officer Perry, young, maybe 30, pale and clearly uncomfortable, glanced at his partner. "It's just standard protocol, ma'am. Nothing personal," he offered. Danielle gave a tight smile. "It's always nothing personal until it is." She pulled out a wallet, opened it, flipped it directly to her badge. It gleamed in the sun. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Deputy Director Ortega blinked, took half a step back. Danielle didn't move. She watched them. Not angry, not smug, just tired. "I bought this house 3 weeks ago," she said. "Moved in last Friday. I've been too busy to meet the neighbors because I've been in Washington preparing testimony for a Senate Intelligence Committee. But today, I decided to take the afternoon off. Thought I'd enjoy my own backyard. You'll understand if I didn't expect company." Perry cleared his throat. "We didn't know, ma'am. Sorry, someone called it in." Danielle turned and walked back to her lounger. She sat down and reached for her book again. "Let me guess. White woman, short brown hair, binoculars on the porch?" Ortega didn't answer, but his eyes gave it away. Danielle nodded to herself. "Figures." There was a pause. Neither officer knew what to say. The silence stretched until Danielle spoke again. "Tell her she can stop watching me now, and maybe go clean her own backyard before worrying about mine." Officer Ortega muttered another apology, nodded, and the two turned to leave. The gate clicked shut behind them. Back on the porch, Clarice stood with arms crossed, trying to read the officers' faces. They didn't stop to talk, didn't say a word, just walked back to their cruisers and drove off. Clarice's stomach dropped. That woman wasn't a trespasser. She was the owner. And not just that, someone important. But this wasn't just a moment of embarrassment for Clarice. It was the start of a storm she couldn't control, and the neighborhood was about to feel it too. Clarice stood frozen on her porch, still holding her glass of lemonade like it could anchor her to the moment. Her face felt hot, not from the sun, but from something else. Shame, maybe, or fear, she wasn't sure which. The officers didn't even glance her way as they pulled off. No explanation, no handshake, Just a tight turn of the wheel and a quick roll down Poplar Drive like they were eager to escape the awkwardness that had just happened. Clarice looked back toward the yard. The woman, Danielle, was still there, sitting comfortably now, book in hand again. It was as if nothing had happened, as if Clarice hadn't tried to throw her afternoon into chaos with one phone call. Clarice stepped inside her house and shut the door. The air conditioning felt too cold against her skin. She walked to the kitchen and set the glass down on the counter, then stood there for a long moment, not moving. Deputy Director of the FBI. That sentence rolled around in her head like a stone in a dryer. She walked to the living room, picked up her tablet, and did a quick search. Danielle R. Monroe, FBI. The articles loaded instantly. Images of Danielle standing next to senators, giving press statements, attending high-security briefings. Appointed just 3 months ago. A career federal agent. Ivy League educated. Commended for undercover work. Lived briefly in D.C., Baltimore, Phoenix. Clarice stared at the screen, her face slowly draining of color. She wasn't just wrong. She was loud and wrong. And the whole thing, it was avoidable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Carol. Heard the cops were on your street. Everything okay? Clarice didn't answer. She opened Facebook and started scrolling. It was only a matter of time before someone posted about it. Someone always did. And sure enough, there it was. A blurry photo snapped through a fence, 2 cops in a backyard, a woman in a swimsuit holding what looked like a badge. The caption read, "When the new neighbor turns out to be a boss." The comments were worse. Y'all really called the cops on the FBI? LOL. This is why folks mind their business. Poplar Drive about to end up on the news. Clarice put the tablet down. Everything felt off now. Her heartbeat was slower but heavier, like her chest had been stuffed with cotton. Her house, once her sanctuary, suddenly felt smaller. The doorbell rang. Clarice flinched. Her feet stayed planted for a few seconds longer than necessary before she forced herself to walk to the door. She looked through the peephole. Danielle Monroe stood on the other side. No sunglasses now, just her face, calm, composed, unreadable. Clarice opened the door halfway. Danielle didn't wait. "Good afternoon," she said. "I figured we should talk face to face." Clarice opened her mouth, but no words came out. Danielle continued. "You called the cops on me. I know you did. I get it. You saw someone you didn't recognize, made an assumption, and thought you were doing something responsible." Clarice swallowed hard. I didn't know that I lived here," Danielle said, one eyebrow raised. "Or that someone like me could live here." Clarice's face flushed again. She tried to find the right words, but they wouldn't come. Danielle held her gaze. "I didn't come over here to yell at you," she said. "I've had enough of that in my life. I just wanted you to see me, really see me. Because next time, it might not be someone with a badge and a title. It might be a teenager, or a delivery guy, or someone just trying to breathe for 5 minutes without being treated like they're breaking into their own life." Clarice looked down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Danielle didn't say, "It's okay." She didn't offer forgiveness. She just nodded once. "I'll be back at work next week. Until then, I'd like to enjoy my home, without binoculars on me." She turned and walked away. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because when someone shakes the rules of a place like Poplar Drive, people either learn from it or double down. And Clarice was about to find out which way the wind was blowing. Sunday morning hit different. Clarice woke up with a headache, the kind that comes from thinking too much and sleeping too little. She dragged herself into the kitchen, brewed coffee, and avoided the living room window like it was toxic. She didn't want to look across the street. She didn't want to see Danielle's backyard. She didn't want to see her own reflection in the glass. By 9 a.m., her phone had already buzzed 4 times. A group chat with Carol and 2 other neighbors was pinging nonstop. Carol, "So it's true? She's FBI?" Janice, "I saw her at the corner market once, real quiet, kept her head down." Eleanor, "Why'd you call the cops though? Clarice?" Clarice didn't respond. What was she supposed to say? That she panicked? That she thought she was doing her duty? That she mistook peace and quiet for something criminal? Outside, a few neighbors walked by. Usually they'd wave, smile. Today, they barely looked at her house. Later that afternoon, she walked to her mailbox. The sun was blazing, but her skin felt colder than ever. As she reached for the envelope bundle, she heard a voice from across the street. "Afternoon." It was Mr. Singh, 3 doors down. Owned the blue pickup with the faded bumper sticker. Retired math teacher, usually friendly. Clarice turned, ready to return the greeting, but something in his tone stopped her. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. "Lot of people talking," he said flatly. "I told my daughter to Google your name. Said if someone was going to call the cops over sunbathing, she ought to know what kind of place she's visiting." Clarice opened her mouth, but Mr. Singh had already turned away. Inside, she sat at her dining room table and stared out the front window. Her block, the one she'd always tried to keep in order, was now moving without her, like she wasn't part of it anymore. The doorbell rang again. Clarice froze, but it wasn't Danielle this time. It was Officer Ortega. She opened the door slowly. "Afternoon, Ms. Whitman," he said. "Just wanted to follow up about yesterday's call and clarify something." Clarice blinked. "Okay. You should know. Every time someone files a report like that, especially when there's no threat, no crime, and it turns out to be nothing, it's recorded and flagged." She stiffened. "Flagged?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Because if it becomes a pattern, the person making those calls might be investigated for harassment or discrimination, depending on context." Clarice didn't speak. He continued. "We take our time seriously, and the communities too." She nodded once, embarrassed, humiliated. Ortega gave her a look, not cruel, not harsh, just steady. "I'm not here to scold, but I think it's time you think real hard about what made you call, and who you thought you were protecting this neighborhood from." Then he tipped his head and walked off. Clarice shut the door quietly behind him. She sat back down, heart pounding, face hot. The line between watching out and watching over had blurred. She'd convinced herself she was the guardian of Poplar Drive. But now people were guarding themselves. From her. But sometimes the most painful part isn't public shame. It's facing the truth in private. And Clarice was about to sit with hers, whether she liked it or not. Clarice didn't leave the house for the rest of the day. She didn't pull weeds like she usually did. Didn't fold her chair out on the porch. The binoculars were still there, collecting dust. By Monday morning, the whole street seemed quieter. Not in the comforting way she was used to, but in that people watching you now kind of quiet. The kind where doors closed a little faster when she walked by, where conversations paused when she approached. That evening, just before dusk, Danielle stood at her mailbox. Same calm posture, same silent confidence. But this time, she wasn't alone. A few neighbors had gathered. Mr. Singh, the Lopez kids riding scooters, even Carol, pretending to fix her roses while peeking over the fence. Danielle waved politely, exchanged small talk with Mr. Singh, and laughed at something his daughter said. Clarice watched from behind her curtain, her stomach tight. Danielle saw her. They locked eyes, only for a moment. But it was enough. Later that week, an email went out to the entire block. Danielle had offered to host a neighborhood meet and greet that Saturday afternoon. Snacks, music, conversation. The message read, "Let's get to know each other beyond the window pane." Clarice didn't RSVP, but when Saturday came, she stood by her front door, dressed and ready, just in case. And after nearly 20 minutes of pacing and guilt, she finally stepped outside. She walked across the street carrying a plate of lemon bars wrapped in foil. Her hands trembled, and every step felt like walking into a courtroom. Danielle saw her coming. This time she smiled, a real one. It wasn't warm, exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It was something in the middle. Real. Clarice offered the plate. "They're homemade." Danielle took them without breaking eye contact. "Thank you." There was a pause. Then Clarice, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "I had a lot of excuses. None of them were good." Danielle nodded slowly. Acknowledging it is a start. Clarice looked down, then back up. "You didn't have to invite me." "I didn't," Danielle said, "but I figured you needed it more than anyone." That line hit hard, but it didn't sting. It landed exactly where it should. Clarice stood beside her for the next hour, listening to conversations she'd never thought she'd be part of. She learned Danielle had nieces in Dallas, that she loved spicy food, that she once worked undercover at a pharmaceutical company for 9 months straight. And for the first time in a long time, Clarice felt like she was learning instead of judging. Because here's the truth. It's easy to build fences in your head. Easy to think you're the center of a place just because you've been there the longest. But the world doesn't spin around your comfort. And neighborhoods aren't safer when you call the cops on what you don't understand. They're safer when you listen, when you check yourself before checking others. Danielle didn't have to extend that olive branch, but she did. And Clarice didn't have to take it, but she did. Because growth isn't about getting it perfect the first time. It's about choosing to do better next time. So if you've ever made a snap judgment about someone who didn't look like they belonged, ask yourself, belong to what exactly? And who gave you the right to decide? That's today's story. If it made you pause, reflect, or just see things from a new angle, share it. Talk about it. Because change doesn't happen in silence. It starts with conversations like these.